remembering World War II in the Philippines. A million lives were lost in the Philippines. 1 million of the population was lost. In Manila alone, 100,000 civilians perished. 110 American soldiers died. Manila became a wasteland. In 1995, a monument was erected in honor of the 100,000 civilians who were killed in Manila. Some remembered the battle. After 50 years, the pain, the shock, the anguish was still alive in the memory. Like Ramon Ventosa, who saw the war at Malacanang. Some lost their father at the start of the battle, like Manuel Colayco, Captain Manuel Colayco, and survived by 7 children, among them Manuel Colayco Jr. They all remembered the horrible month of February. Like Miguel Perez Rubio, lost his entire family, all victims of Japanese cruelty. All were brutally killed. Ambassador Rocha lost his mother to American shelling at Ermita. Justo Ortiz and family were lucky to leave Manila, but his cousins were not so lucky. They're among those who were killed at the German club. Carmen de la Vara lost his brother, Placido de la Vara. His brother was among the hundreds of civilians who were murdered by the Japanese at the air raid shelter in Intramuros. This is where the remains of the hundreds of civilians, including priests, Spanish priests, who were murdered, are all found at the crypt of San Agustin Church. The remains of the victims, 800 victims of the German club massacre, the graves remain unmarked, and at the left side of St. Vincent de Paul Church, San Marcelino, Manila, better known as San Marcelino Church in the pre-war years. In August 2005, the National Historical Institute sponsored a conference remembering World War II in the Philippines. And my topic was about the battle for the liberation of Manila. Survivors of the massacre in Manila were among those who visited and listened. Preparation for the Battle of Manila. The Japanese military started the defense plan after the landing of American forces in Leyte in October 20, 1944. As early as December 1943, some guerrilla units were able to uncover the Japanese military plan to make Manila as a battlefield. General Douglas MacArthur's plan. General Douglas MacArthur, basing on some unverified intelligence reports that the American internees would be executed, planned for the liberation of Manila, which was contrary to the strategy by other military leaders. But MacArthur's plan was approved by President Roosevelt. Military leaders wanted to take Formosa first, but MacArthur insisted we have to take the Philippines first. And so they planned for the landing at Leyte. MacArthur landed at Lingayen, Pangasinan in January 9, 1945. His plan was just to liberate the internees at UST, secure Malacanang Palace, and the legislative. It seemed too easy, not knowing the Japanese plan. The people were jubilant, for at last they saw the liberators and thought it was just easy, and really just for a few weeks, not knowing it will take months, even Manila, after 1 month of battle. The Americans had to neutralize the Japanese Air Force. The Americans finally entered Manila February 3, 1945. And the First Cavalry was the first to enter Manila, then followed by the 37th Infantry the following day. Manila became a battlefield. Buildings were destroyed, civilians killed, and Manila became a battleground that never happened in the Second World War. Japanese defenses. The landing of the American forces since the 20th of October 1944 made the Japanese prepare for the imminent invasion and set up plans for the defense of Manila, including the systematic destruction of properties and unarmed civilians and elimination of the anti-Japanese underground. Explosive charges were placed under the North Manila's 4 bridges and buildings. Major streets were mined. Many private buildings were confiscated and turned into outposts. Some naval guns were placed atop of several buildings. Outposts were installed in almost every major street, corner, and Marines armed with machine guns. Yamashita's order, retreat to the north. The head of the Japanese force in the Philippines, General Yamashita, set and executed the plan of retreating to the northern part of Luzon and declare Manila as an open city. The orderly surrender of the strategic places to the liberators. But before the Americans entered Manila, the authority for the defense of Manila was relegated by Lieutenant General Yokoyama to a losing admiral, Rear Admiral Sanyi Iwabuchi, a loser of naval battles, was in Manila without any active position as a castigation for a miserable and dishonorable performance in the previous naval battles. Iwabuchi disobeyed Yamashita's order. Instead, he issued an order to make a suicidal defense of Manila with 16,000 Japanese troops. Even the Chinese and Korean clerks and cooks were trained to kill and commit suicide. The rush to liberate the internees at UST. The 37th Infantry Division under 6th Army of General Kruger of German parentage and one who would disagree with MacArthur was assigned to liberate Santo Tomas and other government buildings. Major General Eichelberger, a favorite general of General MacArthur, knowing the prestige at stake in liberating Manila, name-dropped General MacArthur's, asserting that he was assigned to take part in it and laid out his strategies. General MacArthur, upon discovering it, just made some modification of his pet general's plans, assigned him to attack Manila by landing from the south using the 511th Airborne Paratroopers. Major General Eichelberger later complained that he was not given enough intelligence reports by the other army. A race between the two armies to liberate Manila started. General MacArthur, due to the disappointment to the slow progress made by the 37th Infantry, called for the First Cavalry to rush to Santo Tomas. In less than a week, the First Cavalry, with less than 1,000 men aboard jeeps and weapons carrier, supported by planes and some light tanks of the 44th Armored Division, moved with a speed never before done in history, and caught up and coordinated with the 37th for the liberation of Santo Tomas. The famous cavalry was known as the Flying Column, was divided into 3 groups or serials, each one with a specific task to do. Liberation of northern part of Manila, Malacanang, Santo Tomas, and Internee Camp. In the morning of February 3, the 511th Airborne landed at Tagaytay Ridge and started moving towards Manila, but they were halted by Japanese force in Parañaque. The second serial, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Haskett Connor, followed and met with the head of the Allied Intelligence Bureau in Manila, Captain Manuel Colaico and Lieutenant Diosdado Guitinco. Captain Manuel Colaico was a 39-year-old former professor of Ateneo de Manila. He welcomed the Americans upon seeing them at Rizal Avenue. And later on, he invited one of his men, Lieutenant Diosdado Guitinco, and they boarded the jeep. At first, they were not trusted by the Americans, but later on the Americans got lost. And finally, they trusted them. And so when they reached the vicinity of UST, at the middle of España Avrnue, in front of UST, Captain Colaico gave instructions to Americans where to go. He knew UST well, as his wife, Clemencia, was a professor at UST before the war. With the 2 guerrilla officers as their guides, the serial, after encountering some slight resistance from the Japanese outposts in Santa Cruz, reached the main gates of UST at 6 to 6:30 p.m. while Captain Colaico was briefing Lieutenant Colonel and other Americans in the middle of